to tell you a tale of two neighborhoods. The first is a primarily Jewish community, and they are responding to the horrific events of summer of 2014, in which 3 teenage boys studying in yeshiva are kidnapped and brutally murdered. And this community felt the repercussions of this act of terror deeply. And they come together like no community before. They come together in prayer. In one of my favorite methods as a singer-songwriter, they come together in song. And they put together this mural as a memorial to these young men. It was incredible. The second community, also a Jewish neighborhood, has a young woman who has just moved in. And she runs into her neighbor on the street, and the neighbor asks her, "So, where are you from?" And she looks at her and says, "I'm from Arizona, somewhere not here." And the neighbor looks at her and says point blank, "Well, you might as well be from Mars." And that was the last thing she said, and the last conversation those two ever had. And the punchline is, you got it, this is the same neighborhood. And it could be any neighborhood. How many of us have had this experience where our Jewish communities are so skilled and so capable of coming together in moments of tragedy and heartache and challenge and difficulty, and yet we fail, often miserably, at those little interactions, those little interpersonal moments that are the building blocks of our lives? It's a discrepancy at best and hypocrisy at worst to say that we try to build a connection for American Jews, a Jewish state that is halfway around the world in her darkest moments, and yet we can't connect to the Jew down the street. Coming together in times of tragedy is important and natural, and we shouldn't lose that. But at the same time, it's no basis for building a sense of identity and peoplehood. These moments are fleeting, they're feeble, hopefully. And they force us to define ourselves from the outside in, based on what other people's actions have us do and respond to. What would it look like if we flipped that model intentionally, and if we really developed this interchange between the inner and the outer, and consciously built a sense of identity and peoplehood from the inside out? I believe that the Torah actually has a mitzvah ingrained inside of it already that can help us do just that. It's something called Ahavat Yisrael, which means love of the people, Israel, love of your fellow Jew. And I have to be honest, this is a mitzvah that does not sit so well with me. My modern sensibilities grate against the idea of devoting a particular kind of love to a little tribe. It feels elitist, it feels outdated, it feels ethnocentric. And I don't think I'm alone in saying this. At the same time, experience and learning and being a part of the most glorious parts of the Jewish community has led me to believe that actually Ahavat Yisrael is one of the most important things that we can develop within ourselves and within our communities, and that we should be teaching in Jewish education, and even more so in Israel education, that Ahavat Yisrael needs to be the foundation for all of our learning in these areas. This idea of Ahavat Yisrael comes from a line in the Torah, a line in Leviticus, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So the classical commentators come in and they say, first of all, how remarkable that we are commanded, Ve'ahavta, we are commanded to love. And they go on, as they are wont to do, and say, who is this reacha? Who is this neighbor of ours that we're supposed to love? And in their context and in their time, they say, well, it's your fellow Jew. Makes perfect sense for where they are. Today, the situation is far more diverse, far more complicated. We have neighbors of all types. And so we're left with what can be an uneasy tension, but what I believe can be a very healthy one, between this sense of particularism, drawn from our tradition, drawn from the Torah, and universalist values. It turns out that while we often see these two sides at odds with one another, that actually particularism is very much the foundation, paradoxically, of universalism. Let's take an example, the golden rule. right? The gold standard of what it means to be a mensch, of what it means to be a decent human being operating in this world. The golden rule wasn't always a universal value. It wasn't until it showed up in its particularist, slightly varied forms in no less than 8 religions and cultures, including Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism, and the list goes on. It's not until these kinds of values are nurtured in their own settings that we can look laterally across and say, yes, this is something we agree on. This is what it means to be a good human being. And so particularism isn't necessarily at odds with universalism. It's a necessary component. In order to partake of all of the wonderful things that this beautifully diverse world has to offer, you need to have people invested in those particular cultures. Universalism otherwise becomes uniformity. And that's boring. And it's dangerous. So I don't think it's such a bad thing, necessarily, to devote ourselves to love. Love is one of those things where the more you give it away, the more suddenly there is to give. But I actually think there's a deeper-seated notion that lies at the heart of mine and others' discomfort with this idea of Ahavat Yisrael. And it is that when we come together in times of tragedy, in times of heartache, in times of difficulty, it's about showing strength and unity. When we come together in love, it's very different. It's not about the traditional kind of strength, but it's about showing vulnerability. It's about bearing our souls. It's about opening up to our fears and our anxieties, and it is terrifying. But it turns out that vulnerability is actually the essence. Vulnerability is a necessary component of building resilience. According to the work of scholars like Brené Brown and others, vulnerability is the core component to people who have become nimble and successful and able to take any challenge that life throws at them. These folks who can open themselves up and address those fears and anxieties and see them in others and use them as a point of connection are those who live the fullest, most meaningful, and richest lives. Ahavat Yisrael is this kind of vulnerability on the level of an entire people, on a global scale. Let's think for a moment about this phrase, Ahavat Yisrael. And I love Hebrew roots, so you'll have to bear with me for a moment. But the word ahava comes from the Hebrew word hav, which means to give, the essence of love, giving of yourself. And we combine it, we squish it together with this word Yisrael. And where does Yisrael come from? Our forefather Jacob, who wrestled with some divine being all night, only to, on the break of morning, receive a blessing of a new name that acknowledged that process, that acknowledged that struggle. Yisrael, to wrestle with God. Ahavat Yisrael is vulnerability. Ahavat Yisrael is giving of your struggle. It is seeing your struggle in others and using that as a point of connection. And we all have these struggles, every single one of us. Like one of my favorite singer-songwriters, Leonard Cohen, wrote, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Ahavat Yisrael is about acknowledging our cracks, about seeing them in others, and about using that as a point of connection and a point of strength and growth. And that's scary. But I think it's worth it. I would venture to say that maybe, at least according to this midrash, it's what God wants from us. And I think it's something that we want for ourselves. What would it look like if this idea of Ahavat Yisrael, of loving every Jew, of loving the people Israel, were the foundation of Jewish education and how much more so of Israel education? What if we started with the premise that we're expected to love one another? And it's hard. I work in the Jewish community. We are not easy people to love. We are not making this easy on ourselves. And at the same time, it is so worth the effort. Can we do it? Can we love our fellow Jew? Even those who are far more or less observant than us, those who fall on other areas of the political spectrum, those who are of different colors or different backgrounds, who are different genders or sexual orientations, and yes, even those Jews from Arizona. Can we love them? And what would it look like if this were the basis of our sense of identity and our sense of peoplehood and our attachment to not only the Jewish people, but the Jewish state? I think it would radically transform the way that we approach Jewish and Israel education, and I think it's totally worth it. And this is something that is not terribly rational. It's emotional, and perhaps that means it's best expressed in music. So I'm going to take a moment and invite up one Jew that I particularly love, my husband, Alan Suffren, so that we can play together a song that we wrote that I hope will evoke some of the ideas that I've laid out here today and bring them home. So it's a tune called If You Go, I'll Go. And it's about this idea of connecting through those cracks where the light gets in and using that as a point of connection and a point to move forward.
Starting over with my people now, the winds of change have blown. Am I ready to be part of what I'm feeling in my bones? I don't want to fight the fight if I have to walk alone. I look to you, you to me. Let this truth be known. For the wrongs I may have done you, for these sins I do atone. 'Cause we need one another to reap the joy that has been sown. So let's go together now to the place that will be shown. 'Cause we're both made out of iron, and we don't need any stone.
Thanks for watching Eli Talks. Click through or subscribe to the Eli Talks channel for more inspired Jewish ideas.